DayZ Standalone's lore is primarily based on the events that transpired prior to the outbreak. Currently, there is little to no information regarding the cause of the outbreak, as all of the events post-outbreak are intentionally avoided. Players assume the role of creating their own story based on foundations of the post-outbreak lore in Chernarus or Livonia, among other maps. DayZ Standalone is set in the northeastern province of South Zagoria in an ex-Soviet republic called Chernarus. Geographically, Chernarus is sandwiched between the Russian Federation to the north of the Black Mountains and Takistan to the west of the Svetlaya River. The exact location of Chernarus is unknown, but it can be assumed it takes place somewhere in Caucasia based on the satellite imagery from the Arma 2 launch trailer. DayZ's lore is set on the timeline of the Arma universe. This is evident by a variety of in-game references found throughout Chernarus. The most notable reference is the advertisement billboards, with at least 4 of them sporting the names of prominent islands set throughout the Arma series. The 4 islands referenced are Malden, Everon, Kolgayev, and Salrani. Another key reference is the flags of various factions that took part in the Chernorussian Civil War of 2009. The start of the outbreak can be likely considered to have occurred sometime during or after 2013, although speculation and the presence of the FX-45 pistol provides a solid starting point as to when the outbreak occurred. The cause of the outbreak will most likely never be explained or referenced, although we will take a look at theories later, as the DayZ developers have specifically intended for players to make up their own story based on the foundations of the environment they're in. Thus, the only concrete lore pertaining to DayZ is the pre-outbreak Arma universe. In many places around Chernarus, garbage bags marked as toxic waste can be found, indicating some cleanup attempt was potentially made during the beginning of the outbreak. At the same time, military troops of the Chernorussian Defense Forces, the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and the Allied nations were clearly in Chernarus. If the reason for this outbreak is not known, regardless, the combined forces could not stop the hordes of the infected and were slowly overrun, even with heavy weapons like tanks, which were destroyed or abandoned. The military tried to contain the outbreak and organized the systematic disposal of corpses. After the outbreak, the local military and civilian defenses were overwhelmed and disintegrated. All inhabitants either fled the country, were turned into infected, or roamed the desolated area as survivors. The lawlessness led to the rise of banditry and an overall lack of equipment and available food. During the events of Arma 2, the region of South Zagoria is rocked by a bloody multi-faction civil war. A communist political party known as the Chernorussian Movement of the Red Star was responsible for igniting the civil war after capturing and executing Chernorussian government officials, torturing and slaughtering local civilians, taking over military installations previously under control by the Chernorussian Defense Forces, and annexing most of South Zagoria. In October of 2009, the United States Marine Corps was sent to prevent further civilian casualties in the conflict. Nationalist guerrillas under the National Party were blamed responsible for a terrorist attack in Moscow, Russia, resulting in the Russian armed forces entering the conflict. United States Marine Corps forces eventually captured the leader of the Shadaki rebels, thus ending the Chernorussian crisis. The Chernorussian Defense Forces, or CDF, are the combined military forces of the Republic of Chernarus. While clearly overwhelmed and brought down by the infected outbreak, much of the equipment from the force remain intact and usable, all highly sought after by survivors that are in the country. The Chernorussian Defense Forces should not be confused with the Russian Armed Forces, although both armed forces of the respected countries are successors of the armed forces of the USSR. The CDF ground forces inherited multiple traditions and equipment choices from the Soviet Army after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, including the various military bases constructed during the Soviet era. In autumn 2009, the CDF was involved in a bloody civil war against the opposed communist separatists. in a close-call shootout with the Russian armed forces. The newly formed Communist political party was known as the Chernarus Movement of the Red Star, also known as the Chedaki by the local populace. After ensuing chaos since the staged bombing in Moscow, the Russian government was completely unaware of the ruse conducted by the Chedaki, in which they successfully defaced the credibility and the status of the Chernarus nationalists by painting them as the perpetrators of the bombing, which successfully tricked the Russian government into believing the nationalists were responsible for the terrorist attack. After many months of civil war without resolution, the country sought help from NATO armies to fight alongside the Chedaki, claim most of South Zagoria, which is what led to the presence of the Western and UN equipment in the area. Lack of readiness and continued fighting left the army with no control of expanding the communist forces, forcing them to retreat. At some point after the Civil War, an infection rapidly spread throughout Chernarus. The CDF made many attempts to contain and destroy the outbreak. They evacuated the cities of Chernarus, set up military camps, bombed cities, and set up roadblocks. But even with these attempts, they were clearly overwhelmed by the infected. Their soldiers either fled to the forest or became infected themselves. With most of the soldiers dead by then, the CDF fell back or was completely destroyed. Now, many weapons, equipment, and vehicles remain throughout the landscapes of Chernarus, mostly damaged but often in a repairable state. Because of this, military equipment is some of the most sought-after loot in the game, frequently used by survivors and bandits alike. The Chernarus Movement of the Red Star is a political movement that existed in Chernarus prior to the zombie outbreak. It was also the main group during the Civil War in Chernarus. Their communist ideology is linked to the nostalgia of Chernarus' former state of being a part of the Soviet Union. The Chernarus Movement of the Red Star, or Chedaki, is a political movement founded on the grounds of the Chernarus Civil War in 2009. The newly formed movement is about the ideology of Marxism. This new revolutionary movement is the start or origin of the Civil War in 2009. Their goals were to turn Chernarus into a communist socialist state as it did prior to being a Soviet Socialist Republic of the Soviet Union. They succeeded in only taking most of South Zagoria and the island of Utes, which they shortly gave up after the UN and the United States Marine Corps helped take it back. They also staged a bombing in Red Square, Moscow, Russia, killing dozens and fooled the Russian government into believing that the attack was done by a national party, which was an underground group which opposed both sides of the conflict. The Russian Federation was not happy and willingly gave excessive amounts of weapons and vehicles, only furthering the conflict. The political movement was forced into taking action upon its Chernarus Russian brothers of the Chernarus Defense Forces. The movement also came in contact with the United Nations and the Russian Armed Forces. The National Party, or known as NAPA, is an underground nationalist guerrilla organization consisting of many ethnic Chernarus and Russians who want to quell any foreign presence in Chernarus. The National Party seems to have no presence in DayZ, but remain as a major faction in the Civil War. The only possible link of the National Party would be the vodka distillery in Vybor, which was owned by a company known as Bardock & Sons. This alcohol company was a target by NAPA as seen in security footage before the outbreak. NAPA doesn't bear a single piece of trust with the Chernarus government, as they see them as corrupted. These rebels were a prominent fighting force during the Chernarus Civil War of 2009 and were framed by the Chernarus Movement of the Red Star for conducting a bombing in the Red Square, which led to dozens of people dead. This then involved the Russian armed forces into invading the northeastern province of Chernarus, known as South Zagoria, in which NAPA was the primary target of both the United States and Russia. The National Party has undergone various terrorist-like attacks on the local populace and was an easy target of being framed. The Russian government had vowed to quell them as they saw them as the main enemy. This led to a big mess where the Chernarus Defense Forces came close to fighting the Russian armed forces. The Russian armed forces are the combined forces of the Russian military. The Russian army had a strong presence in Chernarus during the Civil War of 2009. But after the outbreak happened shortly after, most of the Russian army backed off and left some weapons and vehicles. Just up north of South Zagoria, next to the town of Krasno, a convoy of most likely Russian vehicles lay dead in their tracks from an unknown cause. At some point after the Civil War, an infection had spread throughout Chernarus. The Russian armed forces fought against the zombie hordes. However, many weapons, equipment, and vehicles remained throughout the landscape of Chernarus, mostly damaged but often in a repairable state. The Russians were eventually overwhelmed by the infected and subsequently withdrew. Russian military equipment is some of the most sought-after loot in the game, frequently used by survivors and bandits alike. The United Nations is an intergovernmental organization tasked with maintaining international order and cooperation. Their only recorded involvement in Chernarus is stabilizing the homeland. However, the UN deployed to neighboring Pakistan later on during Operation Arrowhead to distribute humanitarian aid and supervise demilitarization of the area. Items and equipment found within post-outbreak Chernarus suggest that UN peacekeepers became involved in the country later on during the outbreak, along with other factions in the region. Chernarus appears abandoned by the UN, potentially leaving behind clothing, weapons, supplies, and vehicles. The United States Marines were deployed to South Zagoria province of Chernarus at the request of the Chernorussian government. Their primary objective was to provide training, material, and manpower support to the Chernorussian government forces, who were being overwhelmed in a civil war, fighting against an insurgency group calling itself the Chernorussian Movement of the Red Star. They were to restore order to the war-torn region back into the hands of the legitimate government in exile. Eventually, their efforts would pay off, and the leader of the Red Star movement was captured, thus restoring peace back to Chernarus. Multiple locations around Chernarus gives us an idea that armed forces attempted to evacuate Chernarus. We see this with many evacuation sites, such as the one at Mishkino, Novi Lug, Severograd, Stary Sober, and Three Crosses. Other locations play a huge role in the lore of DayZ, so let's take a look at them. Tizzy Military Base is a large military facility located in the foothills of the Black Mountains, approximately 4 kilometers south of the Russian border in the extreme north of the Chernorussian province of South Zagoria. The base lends its name from the small village of Tizzy, situated roughly 1.6 kilometers to the northeast. During the outbreak, the base was the site of the last stand against the infected in South Zagoria. The base's facilities were seemingly enhanced with a huge military camp in the forest south of the main installation, presumably to accommodate additional military assets sent to the region in response to the outbreak. Due to the collapse of the organized military resistance in the region, Tizzy Military Base is entirely overrun with infected, with various buildings in the base such as the headquarters, mess hall, and radar building succumbing to a general lack of maintenance. Kaminsk Military Base is an old abandoned military facility located in the north of Chernarus. Kaminsk is far off the beaten track and may have been abandoned even before the outbreak because much of the barracks fixtures and military tents have become overgrown with vegetation, much more than any other base in Chernarus. It also harbors a dark secret near its southeastern perimeter, an inaccessible that was once accessible before an update underground bunker filled with dead bodies. Survivors can only get a glimpse of the underground through a metal gate, although various pipes and presumably an access way enclosed in concrete can also be seen. The presence of an underground facility in a huge mass grave has naturally led to the speculation regarding the history of the base, with many theorizing that the facility is where the outbreak originated. However, without greater access to the underground, survivors may never know the true purpose of the base. Green Mountain Military Base is a small military installation situated atop of Green Mountain. Due to being centered around a large radio tower, the base is easily locatable and attracts survivors from afar. Survivors can only speculate about the base's history and what role, if any, it may have played before and during the outbreak. One of the more popular theories alleges that the facility played a key role in the systematic extermination of the civilian populace, as can be seen throughout the region in the form of mass graves. Others claim to have heard radio transmissions emanating from the base when in possession of a handheld transceiver.
8107 049 047 049 047.
After further investigation, it was determined that these transmissions were locations of tree stands and nothing of significance. Many theories surround the lore of DayZ and what actually caused the outbreak. In this segment, we will be looking at a few theories across Reddit and other formats to take a deeper dive into what could have possibly caused the outbreak. Our first theory comes from the DayZ Podcast, where former DayZ dev Matt Lightfoot sheds some light on what could have possibly caused the outbreak.
Who's one of the testers. So he's loading into Utes in one of the player roles on the mod. Dean Hall presents, yeah. And it'll say a USEC Force production, because USEC Force was our gaming clan. The super old logo. But we used to have this intro every single time you loaded onto a frickin' server. So, on the 12th of March 2013, I imagine, the rabies virus mutated and something basically, and triggering a global pandemic. Basically, this was the backstory that we had to it, and it was very much based on 28 days later.
Spread among the world's population, triggering the virus creates a massive.
It was I can't remember, something shock, known as an
immune response.
Immune response known as an epilepsy. Is it something shock? And basically, yeah,
so
it would cause.
This is next level, Matt. This is stuff that I call myself a DayZ fanboy, but I've never heard that it was from the rabies virus, or if I have, I've forgotten. Yeah. Ben, are you?
This is not. This is not canon. This is not canon. This is just that we put together back in like 2012 before it was ever released. Like,
no,
not canon.
No, it's canon crazy. Now. It's canon now.
Yeah. So it says, for most, the fevers run so high that their heart stops and their brain cooks. I am also pausing and unpausing so I can actually read the text. 80% of the world's population die. And also, all of this artwork is fair use. Those that survive suffer brain damage from the virus, and
from the fever.
Oh, fever. Sorry, from the fever, and as there's something
spreads.
You're best reading that.
The brain. I don't know. Yeah. Aggression, insomnia, something else, and something else. Okay. This feels like you predicted 2020.
Oh god. Yeah. Basically, it's giving you the background. It might have even been that text might have even been nicked off 28 days later. Society crumbles as the pandemic spreads rapidly. You are one of the 2% who are immune. This is your story.
The original creator of DayZ, Dean Hall, wrote his very own backstory about a prion disease that spreads among the world's population, triggering a global pandemic. And here we see 87.8 Survivor FM go into further detail.
Folks, so here's where things start to get interesting. Now, I posted up on Reddit asking people if there were any other little bits of misinformation about DayZ that bug you. And pretty much the smartest guy I know when it comes to DayZ lore, Chamber Senator, or known as Avagar on Reddit, piped up with a link to a document that I had never seen before. And it has a slightly different version of the DayZ lore, which he states is from the actual files from Arma 2. Now, this actually links to a website called dayzinversion.com/backstory. And slightly different, this is what you would see on the loading screen. Dean Hall presents a USEC Force production. On the 12th of March 2013, a prion disease spreads among the world's population, triggering a global pandemic. The disease causes proteins in the brain to be replaced with prions, ceasing regular function. Most people progress to dementia and then death as the brain is replaced with ineffective sludge. 86% of the world's population die. Some survive with the disease in a chronic state. Lacking regular brain function, they are scarcely human. They are unable to communicate, driven by insatiable desire for violence, and attracted to the scent of those uninfected. Society crumbles as the pandemic spreads rapidly. You are one of the 2% who are not infected yet. This is your story.
Both of these viruses lead me to believe that this is a biochemical attack, most likely from the Napa Party or the Party of the Red Star. Using the abandoned military base at Kaminsk, one of these two parties, out for revenge, created a biochemical weapon and used it against the population in order to gain control. But things got out of hand and a global pandemic followed. This could be why you see the underground facility at Kaminsk with piles of bodies and biohazardous waste bags. Our final theory is one I have concluded myself. Aliens. We see aliens in 2 modded maps in Namalsk and Banov and 1 DLC in Livonia. The Arma 3 DLC Contact takes place in Livonia, in which you investigate the possibility of alien life. But what I really want to concentrate on is Namalsk. Namalsk has an alien structure and a wormhole that has been discovered on the island. After the events at Namalsk, and if you don't know what happened, you can check out my video, I'll have it linked below. An alien ship enters Earth's atmosphere carrying some sort of artifact. As it enters the atmosphere, the outbreak occurs, sending Namalsk and other parts of the world into complete chaos. To conclude this documentary, I'll just say this. We may never know what caused the outbreak, because even the DayZ development team is on record saying that they don't even know what caused the outbreak, and that there is no lore except for what exists from the Arma 2 story. So my suggestion to you is to create your own story. That's what's so great about DayZ. Every life is a new story.